How do you use gels to make your background different colors, including green? I'm going to show you on today's episode of
Ask David Bergman.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. Here I am, as always, answering your photography questions. You've probably got photo questions. You know what to do. Go to askdavidbergman.com. Ask your questions right there on the site. I just might pick it to answer right here on a future show. Also, hit that subscribe button down below. Use the little bell icon. You'll be notified as soon as new shows come out all week long from myself and the other photo hosts right here on Adorama TV. Also in the description down below, I've got a link to my personal YouTube channel where I'm doing a new series called From the Vault. I'm looking back at my 30-year archive and telling the behind-the-scenes stories and also making some of those photos available as fine art prints for a limited time, so I hope you'll check that out. All right, today's show, I've got a question from Raul F, and he wants to know, how can I make the sky green when shooting outdoor portraits with gelled speedlights? Raul, you're a strange man, but I like you. I don't know why you would ever want to make the sky go green completely, but I'm up for the challenge on figuring out how to do that. Now, I'm going to get to green in a few minutes, but to do so, what I'm going to do is use a technique that I've shown before, which is for a more practical purpose. It's possible to give your images a blue sky, which is, of course, much more natural feeling, even on an overcast gray day, while keeping your subject a neutral color by using flash with gels on it. Now, the basic concept is this. What you want to do is make everything blue. You want to make your entire image blue and then compensate with the opposite color on your flash. Now, one way to make everything blue is to use a blue filter over your lens, which absolutely is something you can buy. I'll put a link down below. And by using that blue filter over your lens, then you're going to use a gelled flash to light your subject. Now, if you remember the color wheel that you probably learned about a long time ago, what you want to do is compensate in the opposite direction. So if we're looking at a blue image, the opposite of blue on the color wheel is yellow. So by using a yellow gel on your flash, you're basically neutralizing that blue. You're shifting anything that the flash is hitting, you're shifting away from blue back to neutral. So that's the concept of how you would get the background and everything that the flash isn't touching, blue, and then the light on your subject is yellow. Now, like I said, you can do that with a filter over your lens, but an even easier way is to do it with your white balance setting in the camera. Now, what is white balance? Basically, color temperature. Every light has a temperature that it's measured in Kelvin, and that changes the color of the light. Our eyes do an amazing job, our eyes and our brain do an amazing job in figuring out what should be neutral and what shouldn't be, but the camera can't quite do that. So you have to set your color balance on your camera, your white balance on your camera, to tell it what color the light is, what temperature and color that light is in the scene that you're in. Now, I'll be honest with you, I shoot RAW 100% of the time, and I use auto white balance almost all the time. It does a really good job at neutralizing the strange colors that might be coming in, just like very similar to how our eyes and our brain do it. It's not quite as good, but it's pretty darn good. And that RAW is going to give you the most control for afterward and post-processing to really get color spot on how you want it. Now, you can do this blue shift or even the green shift, as we're going to get to, using white balance in the camera. So earlier today, I took my friend Angie out into Central Park to try to demonstrate how this would work. Now, I first photographed her with no flash or gels. It's an overcast day, right? This isn't much of a picture, but I'm just trying to demonstrate what's happening with the color. Because it was a gray day, it's a very neutral color on her and on the background. There's no color cast, no unusual color cast. Everything is somewhat neutral. I'm using the Canon 1DX Mark III and a 16-35 f4 lens. My exposure on this frame is 100 ISO, 250 to the second at f4. Now, I know I'm going to be lighting her with a flash, so I closed down my aperture to make that background darker. So I went all the way up to f11, right? So my aperture is closed down. My whole image is going to get darker. Now, with white balance settings, it sometimes gets confusing for people because it's backwards from what you might expect. Tungsten light, if you look up the color temperature and the color of tungsten light, it's a warm color, right? So, which is about 3,200 degrees Kelvin. That's a much warmer than neutral, more orange, yellow color. But when you take your camera off the auto white balance setting and switch to tungsten, which really it's just a preset, right? So those settings, tungsten, incandescent, fluorescent, all of those settings on your white balance settings, those are just presets of different Kelvin temperatures. when you switch to tungsten, or manually, you could go to 3200 Kelvin or around there, it's going to make the entire image blue. Now that seems backwards, right? Because tungsten light is warm, it's not cold blue. But why it works that way is because when you're setting the camera at 3200 Kelvin, you're telling the camera that the light you're shooting in is tungsten light. It's 3200 Kelvin light, so it's very warm, and you want to neutralize that color. So if it knows the light source is warm, it's going to shift everything cold blue, right? So therefore, it's going to compensate for that and going to give you a neutral picture. So even though tungsten light is warm, when you set to tungsten, it's going to make everything shift to that cold blue. So now I added the flash in my picture with Angie, and without any gels, since flash is daylight balanced, just like the daylight is, everything's still blue. The flash, the light that's hitting her is blue, the background's blue, everything is very blue. Now again, on the color wheel, the opposite of blue is yellow. So you can use a yellow gel over the flash to neutralize the light that's hitting her. Now I personally like to use a CTO, which is a little bit more orange, for my gel when I'm doing this, so that it overcompensates a little bit and is going to warm up my subject just a little more. It gives them a little more life in their skin, and they're not sort of neutral. They're just a little warmer, even if it's a tiny little bit warmer. So I like to use a traditional CTO gel in this case. Now remember, everything that's not being hit by the flash is going to be blue because we're in our tungsten setting. Now I'm using one Speedlite and a relatively small 2x3 foot glow softbox, so it's not going to give full coverage, but I was really just photographing her upper body anyway. I would use a bigger strobe, probably more of a studio strobe, if I was really shooting full body and wasn't worried about pushing the limits of how much power I could get out of that Speedlite. And of course, the flash isn't hitting any of the trees or the buildings. I would have preferred to just have sky in the picture, but it's actually surprisingly hard to find an area of sky in Midtown Manhattan, New York City, without seeing any trees or buildings. So again, it works for the demonstration. Now, we know how to make the background blue, and that works perfectly, but let's get to Raul's green challenge. For some reason, with digital cameras, solid primary colors are actually really difficult for them to capture and reproduce. Not for some reason. I mean, there are reasons. It's really because of how the sensors work. But that's really another video. It's very technical and not worth getting into. But suffice it to say that our eyes and brain do a better job rendering solid green than digital cameras do. So these images are going to look a little wonky, but you'll still get the idea. This is really more of a technical challenge than a practical one. If I was doing this for real, I might consider shooting film. Or would have to research different cameras. Some of them are going to be better capturing that one solid color. Film would actually work really, really well. But I can't think of a scenario where I'd want to shift the color all the way green anyway. Now, just like blue, you can use a green filter over your lens. That's probably the simplest way to do it. They do make those. They're used usually for black and white imagery because filtering different colors is going to give you different looks in black and white. And then once you have that green gel over your lens, you use the opposite gel color, which the opposite of green on the color wheel is red. So you use red gel on your Speedlite to compensate. So wherever your flash hits, you are going to get more of a neutral color. But let's try to get it done with white balance instead of using a filter. Now, green is also kind of hard to do with white balance because as opposed to the tungsten and blue settings, white balance actually has two axes. Kelvin color temperature is only really for the blue amber spectrum, but there's another axis. That's going to cover most cases that you're going to stumble into where you're going to need to fix white balance. But there's another axis, and it's tint. And tint covers the green magenta spectrum. So on the 1DX Mark III, you can actually shift the white balance in the menus, but it's really just for small shifts in color. If you go to the green side, you're not going to make everything super green. It's never going to get really that full green. It's really just to help you eliminate slight color casts. In this case would be if you had a red color cast, you could go green and get rid of some of that. But I'm shooting raw anyway, so like I said, I know I can work in post, but I want to do it using a different thing, which is basically the custom white balance function. Using a custom white balance, you can get almost any color, again, with limitations of the sensor, but normally how you do it on most cameras is you shoot a frame in the lighting environment that you're in, and you tell the camera, that's the image I want to use. I want that to be neutral. And then it's going to compensate in the other direction to neutralize that color cast. Now, I wanted to trick the camera into thinking the light is opposite of green. So all I did was hold that red gel over the lens and then use that frame. I shot a picture of that and used that frame to set my custom white balance. Now, changing my white balance setting from auto or tungsten to use the custom one I just set, you can see the entire image is now green. So now I take that same red gel and put it over my Speedlite, and we've got a green sky and a normal looking model. Now, just a note, I had to actually take the softbox off because I'm shooting through a very dense red gel into a softbox in daylight, trying to compensate for the sun, and I just didn't have enough power to do that, so where I could get enough light on her to make to actually demonstrate this. So I took the softbox off and just went with the bare bulb strobe to demonstrate what the light is doing. Now, it wasn't exact in the camera because you can only go so far in the camera with a custom white balance. So I also shot a picture of a color checker. I used the color checker passport from X-Rite and was able to neutralize using the Canon Digital Photo Pro software in the computer to read my raw files. And I was able to use that color checker to get a proper neutral white balance by clicking on those gray areas. I always like to do that in a tricky lighting situation so I have a reference frame and I can neutralize the colors. Now, of course, I'm shooting in RAW. You'd never be able to do this if you only had a JPEG. You just wouldn't be able to shift that far unless you used a green filter on the lens. So there you have it. It's not the prettiest photo in the world, but it can be done. It's more likely that you're going to use a yellow or an orange gel on your flash to switch to the tungsten white balance and make your sky blue on a dull gray day. But thanks, Raul, for sending in that challenge. It was kind of fun for me to figure out how to make that happen. Do you guys use gels and white balance to change your background? What about colored filters? Have you ever tried that? Let me know in the comments below how you would use that in a practical situation. Remember, you can send in your photo questions to AskDavidBergman.com. I'm back here every week with a brand new episode. I hope you'll tune in next Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern. I'll be right back here with another question on Ask David Bergman.